It was never supposed to happen. That's what I keep telling myself. That if I had been more careful, if I had seen the signs, maybe things would have turned out differently. But here I am, years later, sitting alone in my apartment, scrolling through old photos, each one carrying a weight of its own, snapshots of us together, of a time that seemed so perfect in the moment, but which ultimately slipped through my fingers like sand. I never expected him to be the one. He wasn't what I thought I wanted. At first, I thought I was just being polite, just indulging in a friendly conversation. We met at a coffee shop, not by chance, but through a mutual friend. It was a typical Sunday morning. Cold outside, the air thick with the smell of freshly brewed coffee and pastries. I remember that day so clearly. I was running late, barely keeping it together as I rushed to meet my friend, not even thinking about what the day would bring. But when I saw him sitting at the table, waiting, a warm smile on his face, something inside me shifted. His smile wasn't the kind that demanded attention. It was soft, inviting, like he knew how to make someone feel at ease without saying a word. And when we spoke, everything felt natural, like I had known him for years, not just minutes. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Just a fleeting connection that would fade with time. But over the next few weeks, I found myself thinking about him. It wasn't just the way he looked or the way he smiled. It was the way he made me feel seen, really seen. Not in the way that you expect someone to look at you, but in the way that makes you feel like you could tell them anything, and they would understand. It was a dangerous feeling. The kind that creeps up on you, uninvited, without warning. And the more I tried to push it away, the more it clung to me. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I tried to convince myself that I was being ridiculous, that this wasn't real. After all, I had always been the kind of person who believed in taking things slow, in letting things develop naturally. But with him, it wasn't natural. It was easy. Too easy. The conversations, the way we connected, the way our laughter filled the room, it felt like we were made to be a part of each other's worlds. But there was something else lurking in the background that I couldn't ignore. I had been in relationships before, and they had always been safe. Safe in the sense that they didn't challenge me, that they didn't ask too much of me. But with him, I felt like I was being pulled out of my comfort zone in ways that were both terrifying and exhilarating. I remember the first time I let myself fall into the idea of him. It was a late evening, just a week after we'd met. We had spent the entire afternoon together, walking around the city, talking about everything and nothing. The sun had set, and the city lights had flickered on. We stopped by the water, just sitting in silence for a while, watching the ripples of the river catch the light. Do you ever think about what could happen if we just let go? He had asked, his voice quiet, as if he was afraid of what he might be admitting. I had looked at him, unsure of what he meant, unsure of what I was supposed to say. But I couldn't deny the pull I felt, the way his words resonated with something deep inside me. I didn't know how to respond, but I knew in that moment that I was in deeper than I had ever intended to be. It was the first time I realized that he was the one I wasn't supposed to want. The one I couldn't have. The one that could never fit into the life I had built for myself. But as the days passed, and as we continued to see each other, the connection only grew stronger. Every time we talked, it felt like we were peeling back the layers of ourselves, revealing parts of us that we hadn't shared with anyone else. I began to realize that I wasn't just falling for him, I was falling for the idea of him, for the way he made me feel about myself. The way he made me feel like I was more than just a person trying to make it through each day. With him, I felt like I could be everything I had ever wanted to be, without trying to fit into the mold that had been created for me. But it wasn't just that. It was the way he saw the world, the way he cared for the people around him, how his kindness seemed effortless. It was the way he would hold the door open for strangers, how he would listen to people like they were the only ones in the room. It wasn't just his looks, it was his heart. The way he loved without expectation, the way he gave without reservation. I could feel it in the smallest moments, like when he would touch my hand or brush his fingers against my cheek. It was like he was telling me without words that I mattered, that I was enough. And for someone who had spent years convincing herself she was fine on her own, that was dangerous. But I couldn't deny it. I was falling for him. Yet the more I fell, the more I realized the depth of the problem. We weren't meant to be together. We came from two different worlds. And no matter how much we tried to pretend that wasn't the case, the truth was there, lurking in the background. He had dreams that didn't align with mine. He had a past that I couldn't seem to fully understand. And I had built a life that didn't leave room for him. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that we could make it work, that if we really cared about each other, we would find a way. But every time I saw him with someone else, every time I felt the distance growing, I realized I was just fooling myself. I couldn't keep holding on to something that wasn't real, and then one night I made the decision that would haunt me forever. I walked away. I told him I couldn't do it anymore, that it wasn't fair to either of us to keep pretending. He didn't argue, he didn't fight it. He just nodded, his face pale, his eyes filled with a quiet sadness that matched my own. "I think I knew this was coming," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence between us. I think we both did. That was the moment I knew I had lost him. I had lost the one person who could have been my everything. And no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was the right decision, no matter how many times I told myself I was better off, I knew in my heart that I would never find someone like him again. Years have passed since that night. And though I've had relationships and I've tried to move on, I've never been able to fully let him go. There are days when I see him in the faces of strangers, when I hear his laughter in the wind, when I catch myself thinking about what could have been. He was the one that got away. The one that slipped through my fingers just when I thought I had everything figured out. The one I never should have let go. And every now and then, when I'm alone and the memories come rushing back, I wonder if he still thinks about me. I wonder if he ever asks himself the same question I ask every night. What if? It was never supposed to happen. I never expected it to happen at all. In fact, I had convinced myself that I had it all figured out. I had spent the better part of my life moving through relationships with the kind of detachment that kept me from getting hurt. I kept my emotional distance because I had been through enough heartache to know that love wasn't always a fairy tale. Love was complicated, messy, and often it was fleeting. So I stayed guarded, cautious, and never fully let anyone in. But then there he was. I remember that morning clearly, the kind of day that seems ordinary at first glance, but in hindsight turns out to be one of those defining moments in life. The kind of moment that shifts everything, even though you don't realize it at the time. It was a typical Sunday, quiet, peaceful. I had planned to meet up with an old friend at the coffee shop to catch up. Nothing special, just a casual morning with some small talk and a bit of nostalgia. But as I stepped into the coffee shop, there he was, sitting by the window, waiting. At first, I didn't even notice him. I was too busy fumbling with my coat and checking my phone to see if I was late. But then I looked up, and it was like the world shifted. I don't know how to explain it, but there was something about him. Something about the way he carried himself. It was like he wasn't trying to be anything. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was just there, present in the moment. It was such a rare thing to see in a world where everyone was always trying to be someone they weren't. His eyes met mine, and for a brief second, time seemed to slow down. It wasn't just the way he looked at me, though. It was the ease with which he looked at me. There was no rush, no pressure. It was like he was waiting for me to come into his world, and somehow, it felt natural to step inside. He smiled, a simple, easy smile. It was a smile that didn't demand anything from me. It was just kind. "Hey," he said, and in that moment I knew something had changed. I didn't know what it was, or why, but I knew. There was no going back from that moment. We didn't even have to say much. The silence between us didn't feel awkward. Instead, it felt like it was pulling us together, weaving something unspoken into the space between us. We talked for hours. In the beginning, it was nothing special, small talk, casual banter. But somewhere between sharing stories of our childhood and laughing at stupid jokes, something shifted. I realized that every word we exchanged felt easy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely seen. It wasn't that he was saying things I wanted to hear. It was that he was listening, really listening. And I realized I didn't have to hide parts of myself around him. It was liberating. But that's the thing about first meetings. They can be deceiving. You meet someone, and for that fleeting moment, everything seems perfect. You don't see the cracks yet. You don't see the things that might eventually tear you apart. You don't know how much you'll come to care, how much you'll invest in that person until it's too late. After that first meeting, we didn't stop seeing each other. We spent the next few weeks finding excuses to be around one another. It wasn't that either of us had planned it, but somewhere along the line, we both realized that we had made room in our lives for the other person. We started meeting regularly, each time with the same easy conversation, the same laughter, the same undeniable chemistry. It wasn't like anything I had experienced before. There was no pretension. There were no games. It felt real. It felt like we were finally letting our guards down, like we were allowing ourselves to be vulnerable with each other without even realizing it. It didn't take long before the friendship turned into something more. We had become inseparable, and neither of us seemed to mind. We would stay up late, talking about everything under the sun, our dreams, our fears, the things that kept us up at night. We talked about the people who had hurt us, the things we wished we could change. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I could picture a future with him, a life that was just as uncertain and messy as I was, but still full of possibility. One night, under the soft glow of the city lights, he kissed me. It wasn't like anything I had imagined it would be. It wasn't dramatic, nor was it some whirlwind romance. It was just simple. He kissed me the way someone kisses you when they want to show you that they've been thinking about it for a long time. I remember the moment his lips touched mine. It wasn't the fireworks you hear about in all the movies, but it was something deeper. It was real. It felt like we were saying all the things we hadn't been able to say out loud. And as he pulled away, his face close to mine, I knew he was the one. I wasn't prepared for how quickly I would fall. But there I was, falling, diving into something I wasn't sure I was ready for, but something I couldn't stop. As the weeks turned into months, I couldn't ignore the mounting tension between us. It wasn't that we fought all the time, or that there was some massive blow-up. It was more subtle than that. It was the small things, the misunderstandings, the unspoken words. It became clear that while we were connected in so many ways, we weren't on the same page about everything. He wanted adventure, to move to new places, to experience new things. He had dreams that stretched far beyond the small town we both found ourselves in. And I? I had built a life here, a safe life, a predictable life. We started to drift, and no matter how hard I tried to convince myself that everything would be okay, I could feel the gap widening. It wasn't that we didn't care. We did. More than I had ever cared for anyone. But love alone wasn't enough. I could feel him slipping away, and the more I tried to hold on, the more I realized that I was losing him. He wanted to be free. And I wanted to stay. We both knew we couldn't make it work, but we didn't know how to let go. So, we kept trying. We kept fighting for something that was slipping through our fingers, hoping that if we tried hard enough it would work out. But deep down, we both knew it wasn't enough. The hardest part wasn't the ending. It was the knowing that we had reached a point where we had no other option. That we had loved each other. But we had also grown in different directions. And in the end, we weren't who we had been when we first met. The night we said goodbye, I remember standing in his apartment, the one we had shared for so many months. The air was thick with unsaid things. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. I didn't know how to say goodbye. He stood across from me, his arms crossed, his face unreadable. "I think this is it," he said, his voice low but firm. "We've been holding on to something that isn't there anymore." I didn't want to agree. I didn't want to face the reality of it, but I knew he was right. We couldn't pretend anymore. "Yeah," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I think you're right." There were no tears. There were no dramatic words. We just stood there, in the silence that felt heavier than any argument could ever be. And then he walked out. And just like that, everything changed. It's been years since we've spoken. He moved to the other side of the country. I stayed here, tried to make sense of everything that had happened between us. I've had other relationships, but none of them have felt the same. None of them have made me feel the way he did, like I was seen, like I was part of something bigger than myself. Sometimes I still think about him. I still wonder what would have happened if we had been able to make it work. I wonder if we would have been happy. But then I remind myself, he was never mine to keep. He was the one that got away, the one I let slip through my fingers even though I loved him. And that is a kind of loss that no amount of time can fix. I will always wonder if we were meant to be, or if he was just the person who taught me how to love with all my heart, only to leave me with that lesson and nothing more.